Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Monday, August 4th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics president and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington bureau chief Carl Cannon. So, guys, over the weekend, about 50 Democratic members of the Texas state legislature left the state. So the Texas House would not have a quorum. Stops all legislative activity, including passage of this new congressional map that the Republicans are trying to get done because it could net them 5 more seats in the U.S. House. Tom, Governor Abbott is not happy. There may be an election, he says, to replace these members. He's called them felons. Your governor has gotten involved. What's going on here? And can the Democrats win this one? Because at some point, I assume they do have to go home.
Yes, these Democrats flew on a charter jet to my home state of Illinois, into the loving, plump arms of our governor, J.B. Pritzker, warmly embraced. The irony of Democrats fleeing the state of Texas over redistricting and coming to Illinois, which is, I mean, if you've seen our map, it has been gerrymandered into oblivion. We have and by the Democrats, by the way. I mean, they have absolutely carved this state up in ridiculous ways to maximize their power. And so here come the Democrats. I think this doesn't end well. I don't know that it's a great look running away. You know, we had a similar situation a few years ago where I think it was the Wisconsin state legislature. They left, did the same thing. They fled into Illinois to try because that was a very closely divided legislature and to prevent some votes from being taken. But to your point, Andy, eventually they have to go home. And meanwhile, you know, Governor Abbott is looking at his available options. And so, which would not be good for them. And so I just don't know that this is fine, they get to make a dramatic statement and they're fighting against, the evil Republicans. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure this is going to turn out well. I'm not sure there's much they can do.
Yeah. Illinois, sanctuary state for disgruntled state legislatures, I guess.
It's for everything. Illegal immigrants and people who need abortions and you name it, LGBTQ, and now beleaguered Democrats from red states who don't want to take votes in their legislature.
Carl, what do you think?
Well, I'm not a favor of this gerrymander. All these states do it, the big states. Texas is one of the worst. 20 years ago, Tom DeLay and Karl Rove redrew the maps and basically denuded Texas of white Democrats. That was their goal. They didn't phrase it that way, but they protected Democratic minority seats and made all these seats. Now they want to do it. Made all these seats Republican. Now they want to do it again because people move around and Texas has, more population. But it's not very healthy. California was the king gerrymander state when I first got to Washington. And Phil Burton, who was actually my godfather, was the guy who did it. He was the person who carved up these districts. He created one for his own brother, John, and he boasted to people. He said, yeah, you have to campaign. It was around the Bay Area. He said, you need a boat to campaign in that district. It didn't respect normal lines of towns, contiguous neighborhoods. It was just drawn to maximize Democrats. Well, now California is one of the most gerrymandered states. Andy, your adopted home state of Maryland may be the worst gerrymandered state. I think all Democrats, one Republican, right?
Yeah.
And so these two parties do these to each other. But the funny thing is, and each party does this, the Democrats in Texas are doing this now. Each time it happens, they act like this is the first time it's ever happened. They never heard of it before. They certainly have never done it. California finally went to a system when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor and had independent commission draw districts and that basically respect. The idea was they respect, communities, the integrity of neighborhoods and communities and areas of interest. It hasn't worked great in California. I think there's 9 Republicans out of, more than 50. Mm-hmm. There should be 15 or 20 Republicans, but there aren't. It's hard to get, even when you're trying to do it right. Politics is politics. It's hard to get these districts to be fair. But this doesn't always work out the way the party wants. They're looking at the temporary gain. But you lost people in the first Texas gerrymander. You lost people like Charlie Stenholm, reasonable centrist Democrats, a whole half dozen of them, and replace it with people like Jasmine Crockett, these flamethrowers in safe districts. And so,
well, she's going to be out of a job if the Republicans in Texas get their way.
Right.
well, that's the idea. But my point is that this is not, it's not good government, whoever's doing it. And so that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Other political news, Nancy Mace, representative of South Carolina, announced today on Monday she's going to run for the Republican nomination for governor of that state. She's calling herself Donald Trump in high heels. Also,
that's an image, Andy.
Yeah, well, thanks. Now it's stuck in my head.
You can get AI on that real quick, and we'll have a video.
Right. And then Derek Dooley, who is the former University of Tennessee football coach, said he's running for the Senate in Georgia in hopes of unseating Jon Ossoff. Let's take Nancy Mace first. Tom, she really wants Trump's endorsement, obviously. She's been critical of him in the past, however. What do you make of her chances, and what do you make of her running?
Well, I mean, look, you have to think that she has a decent shot at winning the primary. It's obviously a very Republican state. And I think whoever wins that Republican primary would be the heavy favorite to win, the governorship. And she's obviously known quantity there, and has, her profile in Congress has been pretty, there are some Congress people who, you could name them right now, and 99.9% of the people, maybe even in their district, wouldn't know who they are, right? They keep very low profile. She's had a pretty high profile as far as Republicans go.
Yeah.
And so I think her name ID is good. She should be able to raise plenty of money, which is necessary. And obviously, if she does get Trump's endorsement, that would be, significant. So she's a legitimate, serious contender, whether you like her or not, whether she's your cup of tea as a Republican or not. She's a legitimate contender.
I was surprised. She's only served 3 terms, but in Washington, you hear about her a lot. I think that she's got sort of an outsized profile for someone who's just been here for a couple of years.
Well, she cuts quite a figure. She's a very attractive person. She's very salty. I mean, she says she gives as good as she takes on social media. She picks fights with Democrats and other Republicans. She behaves in a way that's very much a modern member of Congress who wants attraction, who wants wants attention, and she gets attention, not always in the good.
And she showed up in her pajamas like a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, she does some things.
Made a big show of that.
Yeah, kind of these flaky stunts that she does, and again, that's modern politics in the House of Representatives. I'm not putting her down for it, but it's not normally what you associate with someone seeking statewide office or to be a governor or something like that. So it was a little bit of a surprise for me, but Tom's right. Once you think about it, she certainly got high name ID. And my guess is people in South Carolina sort of love her or hate her. My guess is I know this, she generates strong emotions, pro and con.
Yeah. Well, I saw one early poll. She leads by like a point. She's got 16 points. Attorney General Alan Wilson, 15 points, a couple others, 52% undecided. So
right.
Lots of things could happen. But let's talk about Derek Dooley. Tom, he's a football guy. He's the son of Vince Dooley, the legendary University of Georgia football coach, obviously a coach himself. But, there have been other football stars haven't done so well in that state. I'm thinking of one in particular, but what do you make of his chances?
Well, so Tommy Tuberville, sort of the example of the coach turned politician. Again, some people think he's not cut out for the job, but other people like him. And look, despite the fact he was the Tennessee coach, which is probably not a good thing in Georgia, his dad was a legendary coach in the state. And so he's got, again, built-in name ID, a lot of goodwill toward that name. And again, his launch video today absolutely wraps himself in a bear hug with Donald Trump and saying, look, this is what we need. Trump gets results. He makes promises. He says what he means what he says, and then goes and gets results. And that's what, Derek Dooley says he's going to do as the representative. And obviously Jon Ossoff is one of the most vulnerable Democrats up for re-election this year. And that is a state that again, Trump swung back his way, and I think Republicans feel pretty good about their chances there if they get a candidate. And I think Dooley, again, he's no experience, so we'll see. I mean, he's going to get some serious scrutiny now, some vetting, and he's going to have to prove that he has political chops, and we'll see how that goes. But I mean, he seems like he's, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say he's better than a 5 in terms of candidate quality because of the history of his family in that state.
Right. No, he's also got Brian Kemp behind him, the governor. So that's a big thing. I was thinking of Herschel Walker as
that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to ask.
A football player who didn't do well. I wasn't really tooling on the senator so much. But Herschel Walker's campaign is memorable for being a disaster.
Well, he didn't win, but that's what I was going to ask Tom, if he thought Herschel Walker's campaign made it harder for a person, who came out of football to win. That was my question too, Andy. I mean, there have been some very popular people, Steve Largent and Bud Wilkinson in Oklahoma, and
Jack Kemp.
Jack Kemp. I knew it was coming.
That's right.
You'd have to start a drinking game for you, Andy, and Jack Kemp.
Kemp never ran statewide, but he was a very popular congressman. He was on the national ticket for the Republicans. So, it's not disqualifying. I just don't know if it's enough.
Donald Trump said today on Monday he was going to name a replacement for the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who he fired on Friday after she came out with employment numbers that Trump didn't like. Is this just shooting the messenger, or are there real problems with that data?
I would, if I say it's just shooting the messenger and somebody remembers what I said on Friday, I'm going to be in trouble, because I said, the good news about the Bureau of Labor Statistics appears to be they're not playing political games. The bad news is they're just incompetent. The president of the United States and the previous president of the United States had every reason to wonder what the hell's going on. Why, if they can't measure these numbers, why try? Or why not fix the system that they're using? Or why pretend that these numbers are more authoritative than they are? These constant revisions, to be maddening if you're in the West Wing. I get that. But having said that, Trump's fired all these other people just because, and he's admitted it's because he didn't like them or they did something to him once in his life. I mean, this is the guy, he fired the head of the Kennedy Center, for goodness sake, the National Archives. He just goes around, and it has a quality to it of Alice in Wonderland, off with their heads. People assume that he's firing people and he's just throwing these, tantrums.
This is how Michael Feroli, he's the chief economist of JP Morgan Chase. This is how he put it, Tom. This was elegant. He said, to borrow from the soft landing analogy, having a flawed instrument panel can be just as dangerous as having an obediently partisan pilot. In other words, to Carl's point, I mean, you're sort of damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't here. They either can't do the job that they need to do, and we shouldn't trust the numbers, or they're now going to be politically influenced and we can't trust the numbers. I mean, it seems we've got to be able to have numbers that we can agree as a country have some validity, or we're really lost.
Kevin Hassett was on some of the Sunday shows talking about this, defending Trump's decision. And he made what I thought was a really good point, which was, look, if I was the head of BLS, the numbers, and we got these massive revisions, right? And they were huge. I mean, they were,
right,
over 100% in terms of going down. And we just had, in the last administration, right before the election, these 800,000, job revisions, whatever. I would not just put the numbers out, as normal. I would go figure out and hire, task my staff with finding out what's going on here. Why is there a problem? And report that to the public and to the president so that there's an understanding of, look, this is what's going on. This is why this stuff continues to happen, to try and make sure that you maintain some level of trust, as opposed to just putting it out and being like, yeah, by the way, what you thought was true is no longer true, and now something else is true. And I think that's what, now that doesn't necessarily justify Trump firing the person, but at the same time, I think there needs to be some sort of accountability, some sort of explanation as to why this stuff continues to happen, and whether, can we fix it? And if the answer is no, we can't fix it because businesses aren't reporting as much, blah, blah, then maybe we need to do away with it, because it has a highly political element. to it. And it also has look, the markets respond to these things too. And we can't have the market responding to false information, or we shouldn't,
Right.
or information that's going to be declared, orders of magnitude more or less that, within 30 or 60 days. So I think it is a problem. It needs to get fixed. And hopefully that is what comes out of this. And that would be the silver lining here.
Andy, real quick, it's not just the markets respond to it. The lawmakers are making public policy based on these numbers, just like they do on the crime statistics, which I know there's problems with those too. I covered crime for many years. You have problems reporting there too. So I think the government has to be able to at least collect good data. That seems to me the minimum.
Yeah, no, and I think, I actually did a 3-part documentary series called The First Measured Century for public television back in the day. And we looked at all these measures that the government does and how over the course of the last 100 years, we've sort of multiplied all, the poverty line, the employment numbers, inflation, all these numbers. And, if you really look at them, they're all kind of subjectively drawn, and there's a story behind each one of them where somebody sort of decided, that's what the poverty line is, or that's how you calculate inflation. And it's garbage in, garbage out. I mean, it's an old story, but in this case, it does seem like firing her the day she comes out with numbers that make him look bad, kind of.
Off with their heads.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. Let's talk about this piece. I also want to talk about this. This is this report in the Wall Street Journal. It's on the front page of RCP today, so people can find it there. And it's that China is limiting the flow of rare earth minerals to Western defense companies. Tom, this is a bit scary. The article says, quote, China controls 90% of the world's rare earths and dominates the production of many other critical minerals. This is part of the trade war, but it affects our ability to actually make war. You put the piece on the front page. Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of shocking, and it's hugely important to your point. I mean, that's why it was an exclusive in the Wall Street Journal, and that's why we thought we'd bring it to our readers' attention. And you're right. You read through it and you're like, what? This is, 90% of the market China controls. And they are, basically sort of choking this off. There are anecdotes in the story about how, manufacturers, some who have civilian, uses, but also military applications are getting, the Chinese are asking them, very sort of intrusive questions about what they're using it for. And they have to provide proprietary information in order to continue their supply chains. And a bunch of companies are now scrambling to find other options to China. And there aren't a lot out there, including in the United States. And that's because we haven't done a very good job of weaning ourselves off of China by investing in, rare earth mining here in America and in other places around the globe. And so we're kind of stuck, and it's not a great situation to be in. Mm-hmm. And the Chinese are obviously, as Trump is, going on with trade negotiations, it's a huge lever that they have, a huge stick that they have sort of holding over our heads. And I thought it was a fascinating piece, and I do hope people read it. And because I think people need to be educated about just how badly out of whack, the rare earth situation is.
Yeah. And how critical they are too. I mean,
they make, night vision goggles and magnets for everything. I mean, not only defense applications, but also civilian applications. I mean, we use this stuff in almost everything that we do now. Yeah.
Yeah. Drones, that sort of stuff. Carl, you read the piece. What did you make of it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to spur mining here in the States. We have some of these rare earth minerals do exist in environmentally sensitive areas, and we've been hesitant, high desert, Nevada, and other places. Our country's been hesitant to mine there. The environmentalists have, and I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I think you're going to see a push, and it'll probably start right away in this administration, to get rid of some of that hesitancy and to start exploring ways to extract those minerals here in the United States and in Canada and Alaska. Because we need them, and China's proven that they can't. They don't necessarily have our interests at heart. Let's just say
it is part of the current trade negotiation, Tom. But it also, just makes you realize that when push comes to shove, I mean, you can't be that dependent on, it's like being dependent on Taiwan for microchips. Who would let that happen?
Isn't that what we learned during COVID? Isn't that?
Yeah, the pharmaceuticals and stuff, our reliance on China for all of these things that we need. We've just absolutely sort of abdicated our own, responsibility for producing these things and just outsourced it to other countries with no thought about like the future consequences. And now some of that stuff is coming home to roost.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. It's a fascinating piece. You can find it on the front page of Real Clear Politics today. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Mark Caden. He is the CEO of Finseca. Mark, tell us what Finseca is before we get started.
So Finseca is a national trade association. We brought together 7 different nonprofits that represent various segments of the financial planning business. And we advocate for good public policies. And it's inspired by this notion of financial security for all. So we bring people together, try to rally people around this notion of doing things to advance the cause of financial security.
Which is why I want to talk to you about Scott Bessent and the statement that he made last week. But before I do, give me your sense of where you think the economy is right now. We got this jobs report on Friday that was pretty weak, only 73,000 jobs, and pretty serious revisions, downward revisions from the previous 2 months. But we also had the news about GDP growth, which seemed pretty encouraging. So what's your take on where things stand right now?
Well, look, we got 11,000 members across the country, so I talk to them all the time. And I think on balance, I think the economy is in a really good spot. I think there are a couple of dynamics that are happening at once. First, there's a massive shift in technology, right? As we see the kind of the boom of AI and, what we've seen sort of company after company after company come out and saying that they're doing well from an earnings perspective, but they're not adding to headcount. And I look at it with our company, we got 50 people. And I think about like just what technology is enabling us to do and increase productivity. So I think that's a big chunk of it. But I think the economy is fundamentally doing well. It's proved to be extraordinarily resilient, which is what you see in that 3% number. Is absorb some of the noise around and uncertainty around tariffs. So overall, I think things are heading in the right direction.
All right, so let's talk about this dust up with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who said last week at an event that he was doing, he was talking about the Trump baby accounts, which is part of the one big beautiful bill for every child born between 2025, 2028. The government will put $1,000 in an account that you can add to. And he said, look, this is a way to, the phrase he used was a backdoor to privatizing Social Security, which obviously made a lot of headlines. And Caroline Leavitt at the White House last week was quick to clean that up and said, this is a supplement, not a substitute. And in fact, Treasury Secretary Bessent went on X to also basically say the same thing and clean up his own mess. What did you make of these comments? And was this just a poorly phrase, poor turn of phrase by the Treasury Secretary, or is there something there in terms of, look, if we can get private accounts for people, that could eventually replace Social Security, or be a bridge to a future where Social Security is more solvent than it currently stands?
Well, I think the notion that a child born in 2026, 65 years or 70 years later, they're going to use the resources in the Trump account to effectively eliminate Social Security. I just don't think that passes the laughs test. I don't think that's what the Treasury Secretary was saying or implying. And I think you start with what Trump has said, and he said he doesn't want to touch Social Security. I think his actions have backed that up. He's gone kind of the other way with the one big beautiful bill and the expansion of the standard deduction for seniors. So that's where you start. But I also think, the Treasury Secretary is a really smart guy, and he's made his living in the markets. And I think what he knows intuitively is that Social Security is going broke. It's going to be insolvent according to the latest trustee report in 2033. We have to deal with that, or there's going to be a 25% across the board pay cut for existing retirees, people like my mother. So we don't want that. But, how are we going to get people more comfortable from shifting, in my mind, this notion of people? Social Security is a defined benefit plan, and it has to move to more of a defined contribution plan. But we need to have people comfortable with the markets. And I think that's really the principle that he was talking about. People get comfortable with the markets, they have resources saved, and that's sort of what the Trump accounts are designed to do. Then over time, that should grow. But I don't think it's a backdoor to do anything with Social Security.
Here's the thing, the reason is you're right. Scott Bessent he's a very smart guy, and he's actually been probably, in my estimation, probably the best secretary, the best cabinet member of the Trump administration in terms of navigating policies and the media. I mean, he hasn't made a bad step until now, which makes me think he knew what he was saying. But we've also, Mark, we've seen this movie before, right? George W. Bush famously, after he won, I think it was the midterm, actually. I think it was 2010 when he came out and said, look, we're going to use up this political capital. And one of his plans was to, quote unquote, privatize Social Security. And that, there was nothing that unified Democrats quicker than that. And it effectively went down in flames. Is it feasible to do what you're talking about, move to some sort of privatization, move to, getting people comfortable with the market and trying to fuse something? Because it seems like this has been a third rail for decades now. Whenever it gets touched, whoever touches it gets burned.
Yeah, I don't think you're totally right. That was 2004, 2005. He ran around the country, did 1 million town halls, and President Bush did nothing to mobilize the answer. I think the big difference between where we sit, not quite today, but where we're going to sit in the end of this decade and the beginning part of the next, is there's a forcing mechanism. If nothing is done between now and 2033, when Social Security goes insolvent, 25% across the board pay cut for existing retirees. There's a 0% probability. So I think the better comparison is really the deal that Volcker and Reagan and Tip O'Neill cut in the 80s, where if they hadn't cut that deal, and the Alan Greenspan Commission, if they hadn't cut that deal, then checks would stop going out. So there is precedent. You got to go back a ways. But when there's a forcing mechanism that there is a bipartisan, people are going to come together. I don't think it's going to happen now. I think the President Trump, has been very clear. He doesn't want to deal with Social Security because, inflation and political minefield and all these other reasons why it makes seniors a little bit more on edge. So I think there's a zero chance that anything is done with Social Security in any time in the near future. There's got to be a forcing mechanism. But I think the Treasury Secretary, looking at the horizon, I think he knows that, look, we have to find a way to get more Americans saving earlier, accessing the markets, having a financial plan. And that I think is the principle that he was talking about.
Is the debt the forcing mechanism? I mean, how concerned are you about the debt and the deficit that we currently find ourselves in? It seems like, people talk about how, we're reaching this tipping point, but yet nothing seems to be getting done. And then there's this, this other component to it, which is, well, if we can ignite growth, that'll solve a lot of our problems. How do you see the debt and the deficit playing into this in terms of, forcing some sort of policy change that, finally Congress would do something about it? Because they certainly haven't been willing to do. And quite frankly, Trump hasn't forced them. There hasn't been the political will on the Hill to get anything done.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the debt is a massive concern, $37 trillion national debt, annual deficits of $1 to $2 trillion as far as the eye can see. So I think they have to, that will certainly be a mechanism. I think that will eventually, the bond market will really drive the decision making. Like what we've seen Congress does two things really well. In most instances, nothing or overreact. I think we're going to have some forcing mechanism at some point to really deal with some of the structural deficits that we have, including the entitlements. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that nothing happens on the deficit, nothing happens in the bond market. We don't have an unlimited amount of time. If in 2033, if existing retirees are going to get a 25% across the board pay cut, the Congress will act. There's a 100% chance on that. So no matter what way, whether it's the deficit or the looming insolvency of Social Security, we're going to have a forcing mechanism that is going to make this conversation a lot more real.
Okay. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. Mark Hayden, CEO of Finseca. Mark, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I recently had the honor of participating in a panel on the future of U.S. foreign broadcasting and public diplomacy, hosted by the Project for Media and National Security at George Washington University. It's an important topic, and it's one I care a lot about. So we're going to present a few highlights from that conversation. We start with the introductions by Tom Shanker. He's the director of the Project for Media and National Security. Then we'll hear from Jim Glassman, the former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy under President George W. Bush. Jeff Gedman, the president of the Middle East Broadcast Networks, which is one of the foreign broadcasters that was recently defunded by the Trump administration. And then you'll hear from me. So here's Tom Shanker.
We are here today to talk about an incredibly important and an incredibly timely topic. One might say too important and too timely, given all that's going on in the world. And I'm honored that you all took time out of your day to join us. Our speakers today are Jeffrey Gedman. He is president and CEO of the Middle East Broadcast Networks, past president of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. To my right, James Glassman, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. And to my far left is Andrew Walworth. He is Chief Content Officer of Real Clear Media and author of a terrific recent essay telling the American story, Public Diplomacy in the Trump Era. So Jeff, I'll start with you, please.
Tom, thanks. And Jim and Andy, what a panel. So in less than 5 minutes, a little bit of scene setting on my side. I would say three things in bullet form. Number one, it is hard to tell America's story abroad at a moment of such American incoherence and polarization, and I would even say fragmentation and sectarianism. That's a challenge. We've been here before in different ways. We did have a civil war, and we did have segregation, and we did have Vietnam, and Watergate, and hyperinflation. So it's not all new, but I think it's a particular and unique challenge, nevertheless, today. And you would really need in this space leadership, and no false flattery to Jim Glassman, but people like Jim in key positions shaping the conversation and advancing an agenda. Second point, Tom, in my three bullets, I think it's a very important time and useful, this conversation today, to clarify what we mean by public diplomacy and what the mission is of U.S.-funded international media. If I take that last part and that discrete element, VOA has traditionally been advancing the American story. I overstate for a little bit of effect. And then the U.S.-funded grantees, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, MBN, and Radio Free Asia, have been doing something of a hybrid mission. They tell American story too, but they broadly support democracy, rule of law, and human rights abroad. That's not in fashion right now, but I think it's a worthy cause. We've done it, and I think it's worthy continuing. And then my third point, Tom, is the current predicament where MBN, RFERL, and RFA are under assault. On March 14th, as many of you know, Congress approved our funding. On March 15th, the Oversight Agency, USAGM, headed by Carrie Lake, ended that funding unlawfully. Courts have sided with us in verifying unlawfully. But the larger truth is this: until we're going to fight and we're going to win. Okay? But until we get some cohesion across Congress and with the administration about America's voice, America's role, and what it is we want to project, I suspect and fear we're going to roll, Tom, from crisis to crisis to crisis this calendar year and next. I think it's a great moment to revisit the importance of the ideas behind this and the importance of strategy and a vision, underlying. And now we're seeing that vandalism is neither. So there we are.
Thank you so much. Very thoughtful and thought-provoking. Mr. Undersecretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you. What I'd like to talk about is how to improve U.S. international broadcasting, because clearly a sensible administration could have taken a look at U.S. international broadcasting and said, this is not quite perfect. It needs some change. So I do think that if we do get a sensible look at what's going on with U.S. international broadcasting, I think there are certain topics that need to be addressed. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. The first one is something that's bothered me ever since I was chairman of the Broadcasting Board of Governors. And by the way, to my knowledge, I'm the only person ever to be chairman of the international broadcasting operation, as well as Undersecretary of State. And this is one of the points I wanted to make, Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy. And that is the sort of the contradictory mission of U.S. international broadcasting. On the one hand, the law says you're a tool of U.S. foreign policy. And on the other hand, you're supposed to be an independent, unbiased journalistic organization protected from government interference. That is a circle that's just about impossible to be squared. In my view, the BBG mission should be the same as the State Department itself, to achieve the specific strategic goals of U.S. national security and foreign policy. And good journalism is not the end, but the means. The second part is integration. The U.S. international broadcasting, this is what I was struck by in 2003, it's kind of sitting out here. And I understand why. I understand that that gives it the kind of journalistic independence that many believe that it should have, it has to have. But it needs to be integrated with the other tools of national security and, the other engines of national security and foreign policy. Third, in testimony that he gave yesterday, Mike Waltz was asked about U.S. international broadcasting, as he should have been. And I think he had a hard time answering why the administration tried to destroy it. But he did raise one issue that I thought was important, and he talked about metrics. We looked at it. I don't believe this, first of all, but this is what he said. He said, we looked at it and we realized that there were no metrics that showed that it was effective. I think that is a legitimate question. Fourth, I think there's a really good argument to be made for having a single entity, not, I think it's 5 separate entities, some of which are nonprofits, some of which are part of the government. I don't think that works very well. And this is something that I've talked about with Jeff Gebman and others. I think that certainly in the current environment and probably going forward, we need to limit targets. And those targets are kind of obvious, Russia, Iran, probably most Arab nations, China, North Korea. It's not hard to come up with a list. I just noticed in reading something, maybe it was what Andy wrote, that the Greek service has finally been eliminated. There are constituencies for keeping certain services alive, and I understand that, but I really think that we need to narrow narrow down the focus. So that's the point I wanted to make today. This is really what the administration has done is an abomination. Clearly what they should have done was to say, we're going to take a really close look at this. I mean, a really close look. Maybe we'll appoint a commission. I'm not sure what we're going to do. It's not hard to come up with a way to do it. And we're going to figure out how to do a better job. I'm not sure. I just want to go back to the metrics for just 1 second. Again, I'm not sure what those metrics would be, but one thing I would say is clearly information wars, what we're doing with U.S. international broadcasting is important. The Chinese are spending, I think, $6 billion from what I read. So that's a good piece of evidence that it's important. The second good piece of evidence is they try to block our broadcasts. If our broadcasts weren't doing anything, nobody would be trying to block them. So I don't think there's any doubt that U.S. international broadcasting is doing important work. Yes, it can be improved, and I think it should be improved. And when sensible people are making decisions in Washington, I hope that happens. Problem is, when you take something like this apart, it's really hard to put it back together again.
Andy, the floor is yours.
First of all, I'm maybe a little more optimistic than my colleagues about this whole thing, and I'll tell you why. Pericles said that you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And my corollary for that, the Walworth corollary, is you may not be interested in public diplomacy, Mr. President, but public diplomacy is interested in you. Public diplomacy is so fundamental to the statecraft that you cannot not do it. So we will be doing public diplomacy one way or another going forward. Part of that is also that if you don't do public diplomacy, other people will. I mean, this metaphor, the battle or the war of ideas, it's an imperfect metaphor. But it's true to the extent that when you cede territory, the territory doesn't just lay fallow. Other countries move in. And that's what is happening right now. We see that if you've read the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post this week, China is ramping up their effort. So they're filling the hole that we're leaving. And I don't believe that we'll go another 6 months without some sort of plan on public diplomacy. We saw it during the bombing of Iran, where they brought back the Farsi service. I think it was about 75 people were brought back, parachuted in. I think they're gone already, which is a hell of a way to do public diplomacy. But it makes the point that we're going to do this one way or the other. And I'm going to offer just one other thing, and this is because I'm a television producer. I think we should be cognizant of how much the media landscape has changed and how it continues to change. And with a large part of the global population, especially in the Middle East, the problem isn't that they're not getting information, it's that they're getting a lot of information. And this is a rethink from sort of the Cold War thinking about public diplomacy. We aren't always trying to sort of pierce with a single bullet. We're trying to get heard through the noise. And so the one idea I would offer in terms of structure, I call it VOA studios. In the commercial world, you have networks and you have studios. These are two very different kind of media companies, and it's just something to sort of think about. A network really is vertically integrated. You think of CNN, you think of really a lot of what Voice of America and places have done. A studio basically is platform agnostic. You don't really care what platform you're on. You're looking to reach the largest possible audience. And that opens the door to sort of co-productions and acquisitions and a lot of reformatting, a lot of things that happen every day in the commercial world, which I think that a U.S. government agency should be involved in as well. And I know some of this goes on now, so I'm not saying that this is totally a new idea. I'm just saying in terms of emphasis, I think it's a place where I would put some resource and thinking and time, because I think it would disproportionately return, which is the whole idea of a co-production. The whole idea is you mass up enough resources and you get something out there that no one partner could have done on their own, which is why it is really the way television is made
big television is made in the world today.
Those were excerpts from a panel on public diplomacy hosted by the Project for Media and National Security at George Washington University. You can see the full conversation, including the Q&A with the audience, at the RealClearPolitics YouTube channel. It's a very interesting discussion. It's well worth your time. That's our program for today. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with more Real Clear Politics. Have a great night.